This is the IFoughtTheLaw.info podcast on People's United Radio. Because the people united can never be divided. In the face of an ever-growing array of injustice and unconstitutional practices in the criminal justice system, we the people have a responsibility to push back and make our voices heard. Governments should fear the people, not the other way around. IFoughtTheLaw.info and People's Radio United are completely independent, crowd-funded platforms that exist to push back against the propaganda machine of a legal system that exploits more than it protects. IFoughtTheLaw.info is neither right, left, or center on the political spectrum. IFoughtTheLaw.info is only interested in fighting injustice by the U.S. government, which we feel manifests in different ways under different political ideologies. And now, here is your host Steve Shagwell and producer Tim Bestbuds.
And welcome to the very first ever episode of the IFoughtTheLaw.info podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Steve Shagwell, and my co-host Tim Bestbuds is sitting right here. And we today are going to we're going to assess the most glaring issue of the criminal justice system that we are facing today, and that is police brutality. And to that end, I wanted to bring in somebody who I have actually worked with in the past, somebody who is an activist in the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota area, and bring her in to talk about the issue of police brutality beyond cops acting bad. What are the things that prop them up? What is making it so difficult to get reform? Michelle has been an activist for a long time, since the 80s, and started Communities United Against Police Brutality well over 15 years ago, and has been actively fighting police brutality. She has seen a lot of things behind the scenes, on the streets, and it just seemed a really, really good place to start is with her. So, Michelle, thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be talking to you again. It's been a while, so why don't we start with you just explaining what Communities United Against Police Brutality is and your involvement in it and what you folks have been doing since it started.
Sure. I've actually been involved in police accountability work for a little over 30 years now. And that was when I lived in New Orleans and, in other areas before that, New York and so forth. But in the Twin Cities, Communities United Against Police Brutality, we just finished our 16th year. We started because there had been, of course, a series of incidents that had occurred in the Twin Cities, and we were locally a part of a kind of a national movement to have a October 22nd National Day of Protest Against Police Brutality in the Twin Cities area. And every year, some of us that were working on different things would come together, put together this October 22nd thing, and then, we would talk about staying together and doing things, but then we never did. Then, literally 16 years ago, a little over 16 years ago, there was a gentleman named Abuka Sanders who was just gunned down in the streets. He had been, quote unquote, driving erratically, according to the police, and they boxed him into his alleyway in South Minneapolis and opened fire on this guy. He was unarmed, and he was shot 32 times. And of course, this upset the community very much, and there was immediate calls for action, justice for Abuka Sanders and so forth. And along the way of doing the organizing of that stuff, I kind of came to realize that this was not the right way to organize, like waiting for something bad to happen and then calling an emergency session, and then we put together a justice committee. And I literally call these justice for fill in the blank committees, and that's not to mean to demean those committees, but what it does is it means that we wait until something bad happens, then we pull this kind of thing together. What I wanted to do is put together a group that would be 24/7, 365, and that would be much more proactive to try to take on the day-to-day incidents of police brutality rather than waiting for the really big events. And it's our contention, and I think it's true, that the day-to-day incidents actually lead to the bigger incidents happening. And I think by taking them on, the day-to-day incidents, that is, we've actually been able to reduce the amounts of killings by Minneapolis police. You know, a lot of our work's been in Minneapolis. We are starting to do more work in St. Paul now, though, because in St. Paul, that's actually become the killingest police department in the state. And they are killing several people a year. And so we are getting involved a lot in St. Paul right now, trying to apply the same model of attention to day-to-day incidents to try to get at the bigger kind of cultural things that create the situation where people get killed by police. So this is the kind of stuff we do. One more little thing about us. We do our work in three ways. We provide advocacy for people dealing with the effects of police brutality. So basically, we refer people to lawyers. We run a 24-hour hotline. We work with people, go to court with people, help people gather evidence in their own cases, do all kinds of things like that. But we do that. We also do a lot of kinds of political activities and things like lawsuits and things like that to get at the underlying causes of police brutality, and then change those policies and practices that let it happen. And then the third thing we do is we provide lots of education. We do a ton of know your rights trainings. We do trainings on how to document police conduct. We call that Cop Watch, and we have a very active Cop Watch program, things like that. So we do a lot of different kinds of things. And the biggest thing we try to make sure we tell people is that people come to us with their police brutality cases, and we always make it real clear we are about social justice, not social services. So while we might provide you with some assistance and things like that, we expect you to stick around and help the next people. And by doing that, what we do is create a movement rather than like a social service agency of some type. We're about trying to create a movement. So that's how we work.
It's a very holistic approach, and one that I feel is necessary. And having worked with you guys, I've seen the results, and you've had some pretty remarkable accomplishments. I know before I came in, you guys got a police chief fired, didn't you?
Yep, we sure did.
Yep.
We've gotten a number of them suspended. Some of them should have been fired, but we did the best we could with it. We also filed and completed successfully a class action lawsuit that basically put cameras in all of the squad cars in Minneapolis. That was a pretty big deal, plus some other policy changes and things like that. And we did that by literally taking the cases we already had that kind of help us inform our policies and things like that. And we went door to door and ended up with 592 cases that were part of this class action lawsuit. And again, keep in mind, this is all volunteers doing this. We've run a 24-hour hotline for 15 years on all volunteers, which is, kind of saying something. So if we can do that, my point being this, we're not super people. We all have jobs and families and things like that. There's nothing super or magical about us. If we can do that kind of work, other people around the country can do that kind of work. It is definitely a doable thing.
And that is so important for people to know. This is, the whole thing looks overwhelming, and it's a massive issue, and there's this massive PR apparatus, and there's all these corrupt laws in place that you have to try to go around, but it can be done. Some progress can be made, and you folks are proving that there in Minneapolis. You've been proving it for many years, and it's possible to actually do this. So, I've been a big fan since the first day I found out about you guys because of that. I see real solutions happening, and you can't win them all, but you guys are definitely pushing back, and I do love to see it. So, now you've been fighting this for quite a while, and obviously the the landscape has changed. Things are different than they were, in some ways better, some ways worse. How do you feel the current state of police accountability and transparency and such is compared to what it was, say 10, even 20 years ago?
Well, I can tell you that I definitely do think things changed with Ferguson. And, a lot of the times I want to get up every day and say, thank you, Ferguson, because it did change the landscape a lot. They created a situation where they said, this is unacceptable, and we're going to turn it out and make sure that this community becomes ungovernable, unless they give us the changes we want. And I admire that. I think they did a great thing. And they were the leaders, in terms of really just taking up the reins in grassroots way and making things happen. So they did a lot for the community. And then people saw that things could be done, that there were things that could happen. Things are quieted down there a little bit, but it's not because people aren't doing things, it's because they've settled into doing more of the longer term strategies that are also necessary. So we believe that things need to happen in the street, but we also know that things have to happen, in between activities in the street where you're over there trying to change laws, trying to change, you're gathering information and coming up with things like how people in Ferguson figured out that most of the revenue from that town was coming from ticketing people and warrants and all of this stuff. And they started going after those pieces of the equation because those were what were driving the other stuff. So I like that they're doing that kind of work. We're in touch with a lot of people down there now. One of the things we've been working on for the last few years is trying to require police officers to carry professional liability insurance. This would.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. This is a powerful new way to get at the culture of policing that allows this stuff to occur. And what I mean by that is this. If a police officer has to carry their own professional liability insurance, and what we were trying to do in the city here, the city would pay the base rate for the insurance, so it wouldn't hurt the officers, but any overages because of misconduct would come directly out of that officer's pocket. So that would give them a huge incentive not to engage in that misconduct and a consequence when they do. Because right now, in our city, our cops our city's self-insured. So if cops do something bad, they just pay it out of taxpayer dollars. Taxpayers have no choice about it, and there's no consequences to the cop. Most of these cops, not only do they not get fired, they get promoted. So this is a really bad cultural situation and a bad situation in general. It's all the wrong messages to these cops. And so we want there to be consequences when this stuff goes on. And so it's been really good trying to get this to happen. And people in Ferguson and other places that we're working with are also trying to get this to happen. We're actually about to start up a campaign in St. Paul right now. So this is a lot of the kind of policy work that I talk about that gets at the underlying causes of police brutality.
It's a little more tedious and it's not as sexy, but it gets things done.
Yeah.
It brings real results. How the effort in Minneapolis, where's that at right now? The Insure the Police effort.
Well, we were doing our best to get it on the ballot, and we needed to get about 7,000 signatures to get it on the ballot. We got 16,000. And so we had enough signatures easily to get it on the ballot, but the city council blocked us. And then we took it to court. And unfortunately, the state Supreme Court went along with the city council. It's a real messed up ruling. They haven't even issued the ruling yet, but we were not able to get on the ballot. But we think that there's another way we can do this. So we there's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak. I hate that language, but you get my point. We can't do this a different way, and there are ways to do this in St. Paul that aren't actually possible in Minneapolis. So we're looking at other parts of the state and things like that. We're also working with some very excited people. We've got a group in Florida that's working on this. Like I said, a group in Ferguson is working on this. We've got people in Vegas, Insure the Police Vegas. We've got people all over the place that are working on this exact thing. So it's going to become a national trend at some point soon. And there's been a lot of excitement in the movement about this exact concept.
Yeah, I'm definitely really glad to hear that it's catching on nationally. Now, if people want to start something like this in their own city, in their own municipality, they can get a hold of you, right?
Oh, yes.
Like they can get a hold of CUAPB. You guys have been through this. You've been doing this. You understand how it's done, and you want to share that knowledge.
Absolutely. We are helping all these groups do it. We're also in the middle of writing a how-to manual of how to do this in your own area. So we have a CUAPB how-to manual. How do you start a group like ours in your area? How do you figure out what people in your area need? How are you responsive to what the community needs in your area? And we know that we like our model very much. We think it's a good model, but we know that every group and every area needs to take things up a little bit differently, because what happens in our town isn't the same as what happens in your town. You know, we can have you have suggestions of ways to take it up, but again, what happens in our town isn't the same. So we have particular issues in our community. For example, we have the largest Somali population in the entire country. And these are people that are very much under attack by the police and by the system itself. And so we have to do a lot of things around, these CVE programs and these programs that target Somalis as quote unquote potential terrorists, We do a lot of work around that kind of stuff in our community, where that isn't such an issue in other areas, and other communities, including rural areas, have whole different situations. So it's just, there's ways. We have a nice model, but it fits a lot of different places, but they have to adapt it to their own areas and what's going on there.
That's really really good. So Insure the Police, it's something you can find out by contacting Communities United Against Police Brutality. And your website is CUAPB.org, right?
That's correct. Absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So I still remember it. Now, are these manuals you talked about on the site, or?
Yes. No. We're in the middle of upgrading our website, so we don't have everything up there quite yet. But we do have, but people can just contact us right through the website, and I'm happy to email all that material to them. And so we are, like I said, working to get that material up on the website. It's not quite there yet, but very soon. There's other things people can do. One of the things that we're doing, for example, with this new website is we've developed a database of police complaints. And what we're going to do with that, and right now it's Minneapolis, St. Paul, and some of the surrounding suburb police officers, but we're creating dossiers on all these cops. One of the ways we're going to do it is by going into getting the court records of all the lawsuits against these cops, adding that. We're going to add, any kind of information like that we can get, any media articles, things like that, and create dossiers on all these cops so that you can look up for yourself. You get brutalized by Officer X, and you want to know what else this guy's been up to. You can go on the website and find that stuff. It's not there yet, but it's coming really soon because we're working on that database right now. We're about to take it live in the next couple of weeks. So, those are other things that people can do. And it's very easy to do it because most places have some kind of a Data Practices Act or something that tells you how to access data like that. And if you teach yourself how to do it, again, none of us are lawyers. We're all volunteers, but we've just learned how to do things. And these are all things, if we can learn it, anybody can learn how to do this stuff, and they can take it up in their own areas.
Fantastic. Tim, what are you thinking? You have any thoughts? You have any questions for Michelle so far?
No, I think it's great what she's doing. I've been hearing about the insuring police for the last maybe 4 or 5 years. But it's been in theory only. I've never heard of anyone actually taking action about getting it done. So I think that's awesome. We
actually developed the concept here about 6 years ago. And that's why you started hearing about it, because we thought of it first here, was our invention, and then we said, well, we're going to try to make this happen here, but we're going to also document every single thing we do, every decision we make. We have our minutes, they're carefully written down so that we can share that information with other people, because there's a real learning curve. None of us, I wasn't into electoral politics. I'm still not. I really don't go that route, right? So I didn't know how you get something on a ballot or any of that stuff. We had to do a lot of research around that stuff because we didn't know it. It's not the way I normally do my work. I've never done my work that way. So I had to learn how to do these things. But again, these are all learnable and teachable things that people figure out, So
yeah,
kind of stuff. It's out there. One other thing I want to throw out is, back when we started CUAPB, a lot of people that I've known in the movement, and I've been connected to the national movement, like I said, some 30 years now. So I know a lot of people in the movement all over the country. And a lot of people in the movement gave me a lot of grief about us doing like case-based work. There was a whole lot of things like, well, you just can't get taken up with all these cases, or you'll go crazy and you'll never get anything done and all that. It's the opposite. For us, it turns out that the case-based work, A, it lets us document how bad the problem is, okay? And B, it tells us what the specific issues are that are going on in our community. And they are very specific to different communities. Like I said, the issues with what was going on with our Somali neighbors, that's a big part of it. There's other issues about how youth are being treated by police in our community. You don't learn that stuff unless you have a way to be talking to people about what's going on with them. And by having a hotline and some resources for people, that gives them the entree to contact you. Otherwise, why would people ever even get in touch with you if they had no reason to know about you? Why would they develop any interest in actually working with the movement? I'm a fat old white lady. What do they think I've got to help them with, So, you know what I mean? I know your listeners can't see that, right? But I also am a survivor of police brutality, which is how I came into this movement. But basically, people don't have any reason to work with you, trust you, or anything unless you give them some resources first. And that's why case-based work for us has been very valuable. It also, like I said, tells us, okay, this is what's going on. These are the policies we need to be getting after, They're doing all this to youth with the curfew thing. So that means we need to go after that curfew thing. They're using lurking, spitting, and loitering ordinances to go after homeless people. Okay, we have to go after those ordinances, which, by the way, we got rid of. But, that's the kind of stuff that helps you know what your community needs from you. And
this case-based work, another way that I see it so important is having, I came into your organization a survivor of police brutality as well, and helping other people navigate the scary waters of the aftermath of police brutality. I think what people don't get when you have police brutality is that the nightmare isn't over when the police are done beating you. That's when the nightmare begins. That's when you're going to get harassed. That's when you're going to get threatened. You're going to get intimidated to stay silent. In my case, I was, psychologically terrorized in court. I've faced all kinds of bogus felony charges, and if some high caliber lawyers hadn't gotten involved, it's possible I would still be in prison for crimes I didn't commit. And getting involved and helping people confront that and being there with them, and them knowing that as they go into this corrupt courtroom with this corrupt judge, and the judge knows the prosecutor and the cops know the judge, that there's people watching and documenting this, it's a big relief.
Yeah, that is absolutely huge. You're exactly right. The nightmare only starts with the incident, but it goes on because the thing about it is this: these cops need to, in some way, justify what they've done to you, because under a U.S. Supreme Court decision called Heck versus Humphrey, this is another thing most people don't understand, so I want to give your listeners a little education about this. There's a Supreme Court decision called Heck versus Humphrey, and under that decision, if you go down on criminal charges related to the incident that you had, if you go down on those charges, you won't have a lawsuit, especially not except for excessive force. And then that's even going to be hard. But any of those civil rights violations and things, all those go out the window. So basically, the reason that cops put phony charges on people is because they need to justify what they did so they can stop a lawsuit. And so people don't realize that, the incident itself, it is axiomatic that if you get brutalized by the police, you are going to get some phony charges. It is rare as rare can be. We almost never see it where somebody gets beat and then not charged. It is rare as can be. So that just does not happen. And so, like you said, the whole nightmare happens. If you are living in public housing, you'll lose your housing. If you have a job that involves, you not having any kinds of violent charges on you, like if you work in the healthcare field or anything like that, you will likely lose not just your job, the job you have right then, but your career. So, I worked with a medical student who was a fourth-year medical student. She was about done and ready to start practicing medicine, and she could not continue because they put phony charges on her, and they prosecuted her successfully after they brutalized and terrorized this poor young woman in her own home. They put phony charges on her because of a corrupt judge. They stuck. And when they stuck, that caused her to lose her ability to practice medicine.
I remember hearing about that case. That was a really well above the bar doctor too, like really incredibly skilled. One of the best minds coming into the medical profession. We had that mind in Minnesota. We had that talent, and we lost it because of police brutality.
That's exactly.
And it's one of these insidious ways that police brutality just keeps, its effects just kind of, there's ripples all over the place.
In that particular case, she was just in her home, and she and her boyfriend were talking on the telephone, and they got in a bit of an argument. And she was, kind of yelling at him on the phone, and somebody outside, I think it was a roommate or something, heard her yelling at her boyfriend, and basically called the cops, and they came to do what's called a quote-unquote welfare check. And these welfare checks are very dangerous. People have to understand that these things are dangerous as can be. A lot of people have been killed during these welfare checks. So they came to the door, and she said, "No, I was just arguing with my boyfriend on the phone. It's okay, it's okay." And she said, "No, you don't need to come in my house." They kept insisting on coming in her house. And when she said no, they literally pushed the door in and pushed her backward, and she fell. And then, she was wearing like a little robe and, nightie because it was nighttime, and basically they terrorized her for hours in her house. At one point, they pushed her into her closet and just forced her inside the closet with the door closed. It's like, why would you do something like that? It doesn't even make sense, because they wanted her to agree that something bad had happened or that she needed some kind of help. And she's saying, "Look, I don't need anything. I'm fine. My boyfriend is on the phone. He wasn't even here. We were just arguing." It was just that kind of a situation. So, and that situation changed this one young woman's entire life. And you're right, lost a talented person now that.
And it probably changed the life of some people whose lives she would have saved,
Absolutely.
You did mention the way police target victims afterwards for harassment. Of course, there's also the matter of police targeting activists, and I want to bring that up because I've noticed that you guys have done a pretty good job of kind of setting up a barrier for yourselves from that. And I know Tim is a known activist in Los Angeles, and there's a lot of activists going to be listening to this, I certainly hope. What advice do you have for activists to kind of protect themselves from the harassment and everything that goes with having the cops mad at you because you're daring to challenge their impunity?
Well, I think for one thing, there's a huge need for solidarity. People need to go to court with people. People need to back people up. They need to really be, in solidarity with people. Even if you don't have political agreements with everybody. Like I don't, agree with everything that everybody in the Twin Cities does in the activist community, but I've always had their back. One of the things that we did here around the RNC, we had the RNC come to town in 2008. And anybody who's ever had a Republican convention in your town knows what a god-awful experience it is. The cops are, they're given all the money they want. They're given huge amounts of money to go after activists. They are given insurance policies that insure them for millions of dollars of all the things that they do wrong. And it's a really bad situation. And one of the things we came up with here was a thing called the St. Paul Principles. And I'm one of the authors of that, and I'm damn proud of it.
I love the St. Paul Principles.
God, yeah. They are, basically they say that we will have, so that we take care of each other and we don't have to own responsibility for things, we will separate our actions by time and or space. And so that, if people want to do something a little bit more militant than some other group wants to do, we'll have some separation so that that's a mutual respect. But also it says that we will not bicker in the movement. And, we do have disagreements, but we won't do them openly. We won't expose them to the media. We will have the principle of sitting down with the people that you don't agree with and working out among ourselves without exposing it to the media. That's a very important principle. I love that principle. And also, we will not cooperate with police to go after anybody in the movement. No how, no way. And that turned out to be so incredibly important, because when there was a group of 8 young people here, people might even remember the RNC 8. These were 8 young anarchists who came under attack. They were the very first people, certainly in our state, but I believe even in the country, that were charged with a terrorism enhancement specifically for activism, in planning for protests and things. And the funny part is they weren't even doing that stuff. They were mostly planning infrastructure like housing, and they got a meeting space for everybody to meet at the Convergence Center and things like that. They weren't even really planning protests. They were planning how to support other people's protests. And they came under attack, the RNC 8. They were charged with these horrible multiple felonies and terrorism and stuff like that. The community, every part of the community came together behind these people. People, we let it be known, you are not getting any of our people. You are not. And this was a beautiful thing, because these 8 people faced really serious charges, really an uphill battle. As soon as you say the word anarchist, that goes a long way toward getting people all whipped up into shape and, into not supporting these people. But people didn't do that here. People supported these people in huge measure. We raised, believe it or not, $187,000 for their legal defense. I mean, that's unprecedented, right? That kind of level of support. And we got these people off those charges. This was really important. Some people took deals for very small charges, but for the most part, we got people off those charges. And it was a very beautiful thing in the movement. And there was none of this crap like, oh, they're the violent protesters and we're the good people. And because that's what they try to get you to do. So, and I see this happen in other communities all the time, and people let it happen because, they're the socialist so-and-sos, or they're the anarchist so-and-sos, or the communist so-and-sos, or the whatever so-and-sos, and I don't like those people's philosophy or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Forget all that. The government don't like any of us, and it doesn't matter what your sort of way of coming at this is. If you are going up against the system in whatever fashion, they don't like you, and under the coming regime, it's going to get worse. And we need to say, I don't care how you come at the system, as long as you're coming at the system and trying to take it on and take it down. And if you're that, I'm your brother or sister, and I'm going to stand with you. That's how we have to do that. Solidarity.
Solidarity is important. Yes, solidarity. And I think it's as we get involved in our struggles, and we're all fighting the system in our own way, I think sometimes we forget about that we're closer to our other activists. Myself, I'm an anarchist who leans right, but the communists, they're working for the same thing I am. At the end of the day, they want a freer society, and we disagree about how to get there. But right now, we're both headed in the same direction, and I'd like to see people focus on that more. I will make a post this week on IFoughtTheLaw.info where I'll put up the St. Paul principles, because you're right, that is important, and people need to read those principles and get familiar with them and practice them. It really makes everything a lot less messy and a lot less safer for everybody.
Well, can I say one thing? This is a great example. 2008, there was a Republican convention and a Democratic convention, right? The Democratic convention, I believe, was held in Colorado, and they allowed themselves to get drawn into this media, creation of bad protester, good protester, and it was because of some infighting in the movement. And their entire protest scheme basically just broke down. There weren't good protests against the Democrats, and believe me, they're at least as deserving as the Republicans. And the whole thing just fell apart there, with people getting charges and nobody backing up the people that got charges and things like that. And here we had the Republicans here, And we didn't have one bit of that. There were virtually every single group in the Twin Cities, except for a couple of smaller groups, signed on to the St. Paul principles, and we didn't have any of that foolishness here at all of them. They tried so hard to try to do these dynamics, and I can tell you the funniest part of all is that the cops themselves, and then some of the journalists that were very right, cop supporter types, were all super pissed about the St. Paul principles. Oh, the St. Paul principles, they're terrible because, they make all these people stand together. Yeah, that's the point, And so any kinds of, and I don't care what people do if they want to take up those principles, make their own or whatever, but solidarity, we do not let there be room for the cops to come in and break us up. We don't let them and their media, buddies, put that wedge, that we just don't allow it. That's not how it gets to go. And that, to me, that's a really important way, because I think coming to, you started saying about maybe something about Trump and the coming time period, I think that's exactly what they're going to try to do. They're going to go after people. And we have to be prepared to stand up with people that they go after.
So you, much like me, really see things kind of going in a bad direction under Trump. It's going to be a lot harder to fight for police accountability. It's going to be a lot harder to fight for freedom from surveillance by the NSA and this kind of thing. I really think conservatives are getting conned. All these conservatives who voted for Trump, I think they're going to find themselves under extra surveillance and such first.
Well, I think it's sad that people don't get that. Not that I was in favor of the other candidate either. I told you I don't do electoral politics. That's not how I do my work. But I do think that basically Clinton was Trump light, or whatever. That she's still very married to the system and things like that. So it's not like I was, advocating and saying, oh, if we just had that other candidate get enough votes or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe that would have done much of anything. I see them very much as two sides of the same coin. But the bottom line is that, a lot, and here's another reality. Trump has got plans to do some bad things, and he's showing us that he intends to go through with them by virtue of his cabinet appointments. But the things he's talking about doing are extensions of the things that Obama did. Okay, so people get deluded. They think there's like a dime's worth of difference between these people, and there's not. And they think that there's something different. But Obama, at the same time, he was sensitive to a certain degree to people's perceptions of what was going on in the country. So he, for example, after Ferguson, put together this thing, task force on 21st century policing. But the reality was that task force was never, ever going to come up with anything valuable about taking on the police. They were going to do things like, oh, we need lots of body cameras. So the biggest thing they've done is they funded body cameras, which never were intended to do anything to increase police accountability. And I'm proud to say that CUAPB said that from day one. Okay, we've never been deluded about what body cameras are about. They're about added spying on us. And because, you got to think about it. Body cameras capture, they sit in the middle of the chest of the officer or up on their shoulder or on their glasses, and they basically record what that officer sees, not what that officer is doing, but our reaction to what that officer is doing, okay? So there's no way to do a body camera or any kind of camera that would capture the cops' actions, because you'd have to put it on some heavy boom on their shoulder and bring it around to the front. There's no way to do that, okay? There's no practical way. The only thing they can do is capture our reactions to it. And now they get to do that in our homes and in all kinds of interactions with us. And in Minnesota, they just did the same thing last year at the legislature that every other state's doing. And they make the footage secret. You have no access to it. It is not going to do a damn thing for police accountability. And that's the absolute truth. And we've been saying that from day one. But that's what that task force came up with after Ferguson to increase accountability, blah, 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 so-called. And so this is what these programs are about. So I don't want to say, oh, terrible about Trump. I think he is going to be terrible. But I think people are very deluded if they think there's a whole lot of difference between that and like the CVE program, which was an Obama invention. These other programs that target certain segments of our community, things like that. People have to get a grip and, there's going to be some bad things. Like Trump is going to be less apologetic about it, but the reality is that this stuff was going on, and that it was happening under Obama. It happened under Clinton. It happened under Bush 1 and Bush 2. It happened because these people are part of the government, and they're not like they're not interested. The police play a very particular role in our society, and part of their role is to prop up these people and to be essentially the army for these people, to keep them in power and to maintain their positions of authority. They're not going to do a whole lot to rein them in. They're going to say, geez, you took it too far and you embarrassed us. So they'll throw a couple of these cops, under the bus, put them in jail, or do things to them. They'll let things happen to them because they went too far. Like this cop Yanez that murdered Philando Castile. We might get some kind of conviction on him. It won't be for murder. It'll be probably for felony assault. But they'll do something to him because what he did was too embarrassing to them. But it wasn't. They're not going to do anything to him because he, oh gosh, this terrible thing you did. He did it in a way that was too embarrassing. So, but this has always been the case. Trump will likely just be like, we're not embarrassable, so screw you. Now we're not going to do anything with any of these cops. That's what the difference is, if any.
And this kind of segs into the next thing here, which some of the things that we're up against in fighting this. We've already established it's going to take a lot more than street protests to fix this, and because there's a lot of other players involved besides the police. And Tim, you had kind of a question in regards to that, right?
Yeah, I was just curious as to if her group has ever had any pushback when trying to change certain laws or get some reform from either police unions or pro-police citizen groups.
Oh, no question. The police union was our biggest enemy around the police insurance amendment. And it's crazy because they shouldn't be enemies about it. It actually gives them a benefit they didn't have before. And so they should be quite happy about it. But part of the issue is that if you have a police insurance amendment, then the cops who are the worst of the bad actors will become uninsurable, and then they won't be able to be cops anymore. And so the Police Federation guy here, his name is Bob Kroll, he, frankly, because of his activities, would have become uninsurable, thus not being able to be the Police Federation president any longer. So we always said that he had a conflict of interest because he didn't want this to go through because it was going to affect him personally, but it would actually have been better for the regular officer in the street who isn't engaged in misconduct. So our whole thing was to try to make it so that these good, what so-called good officers, and I don't really differentiate between good officers and bad officers, by the way. I always say it's a bad system because it allows the so-called bad officers to continue without being stopped. But nonetheless, if you want to use that terminology, the good officers would have had a better protection than these so-called bad officers. And as these officers who were engaged in the worst of the misconduct got weeded out, the better officers would be able to work in an environment where they didn't have to work with these clowns. They don't want to work in that environment. And so, he should have been in favor of it, but he wasn't. And it's real typical of police unions to not be in favor of any kind of accountability structures. So we have always had to fight those guys. And a lot of the city council members are in league with them. People that try to stop you from doing things you need to do. And everything the cops want, they get. And anything the community wants, they try to stop it. So like when we were trying to get rid of the loitering and spitting, lurking ordinances because they were being used really pretty exclusively on homeless folks. And in Minneapolis, greater than 85% of homeless people are black. So it was really being used on black folks and very vulnerable black folks at that. And so when we were trying to get rid of that, there was all these city council members and they were saying things like, oh, but we need this as a tool for our officers. They need this as a tool. And that's the language you hear every time. It's always about a tool that the officers need. And they don't need those so-called tools. It's called discrimination. It's called civil rights violations. And they're not tools. They don't have any valid purpose, but they always use that language. So yeah, we always have to go up against that stuff. You have to try to do some work behind the scenes to find the city council members that'll back you up and that'll help you. You have to do other things to try to help them be able to get some backing from other members of their council. We do a lot of research. We use a lot of statistics to validate the changes that need to happen. And Steve talked about that before. He said it's not the sexy work. Yeah, I love a good protest in the street. I'm down for it every time. But it is the unsexy work, but it's the work that gets things done. All of it's necessary because protests are about exposure and pressure. And that other work is about taking that exposure and pressure and taking it to the next level and getting the changes made that you need to make.
Right. The police unions, would you say that when people look at this issue, would you say that people, because I feel this is the case, would you say that people are underestimating the role police unions play in this and the power that they have?
There is no question about it. Here's a great example, and this happens all the time. We just had a guy here who was videotaped punching the lights out of a kid. A guy was just standing at the edge of the park, a Somali kid, and this was in Richfield, which is a sort of inner ring suburb of Minneapolis. And this kid was just standing at the edge of the park waiting for his ride. He was doing nothing wrong, broke no laws. The cops came, Richfield cops came, and they told the kid to get out of here. He says, I'm waiting for my ride. The cop just mowed this guy down, beating the crap out of him. He popped him. The guy fell. Then he starts pummeling the kid, and he's telling him, I said, we're working here. Get the beep out of here, and basically pummeled this kid. And this was all caught on videotape. There's no rationale for it. The kid's going to sue and all of this. The Richfield police chief fired this guy. He didn't like this conduct. He fired this guy. Well, they went to arbitration, and not only did they have to hire the guy back, but they had to give him back pay and all of this stuff. And the guy has no consequences for pummeling this kid, breaking his face and all this stuff. That was one. We had another situation where a cop, basically, he was going to a conference he was a dog handler cop, and he was going to a conference about dog handling and some kind of special certifications. He gets rip-roaring drunk. It's at a casino. He gets rip-roaring drunk at the casino. He's molesting women in the casino, in the bar, the workers and other women, and they're complaining about him and saying, what's up? And this guy, he's on the taxpayer dime now, going to a work conference. He's rip-roaring drunk. He is doing all this other conduct and he's loud, he's obnoxious. And then when he leaves, he takes his dog, and the dog got caught in this revolving door. And then he got mad because the dog couldn't get out quite that way. And he beats the crap out of the dog. All of this is on camera. He beats the crap out of his dog. And again, got fired for it and reinstated by the arbitrator. And the arbitrators are hired by these unions. They know who will put the guy back on the job. And this is part of it. And the other thing about these unions, now listen, we're not anti-union in our group. But right. Another thing about these unions is that these unions are not real unions. Unions, they do collective bargaining and things like that, but they represent line staff. These police federations represent people all the way up to the point of deputy chief, typically. So they're representing management as well, which should be considered a huge conflict. It's very weird. So we don't have any problem with whatever they negotiate for benefits and pay. We never care about that stuff. What we care about is the way that they negotiate into their contracts, the ability to avoid consequences for their conduct. And that is wrong, and it needs to end. It needs to change.
Could you elaborate on the arbiters? I've heard about arbitrators. I actually had a police chief tell me it's pointless to try and discipline officers because the arbitrators just come in and get it overturned. How do they do this? How do they pull this off?
Yeah, it has to do with the union contracts, and then in some cases state laws, and there are some state laws in Minnesota that contribute to this as well. But what happens is there's these little arbitration services, and by the way, they're paid very, very well. And there's these certified arbitrators or whatever who listen to this stuff. And when a police officer, gets in trouble for something, basically the main reasons cops get in trouble is for internal complaints, things like, showing up to work late too many times, or, these kinds of things. And when those things happen, you understand why there's a need for a union and some representation of the worker and so forth and things like that. But it's when these cops engage in things that are actually illegal and that people have won large lawsuits over, they shouldn't be able to protect these people from that. But they do. And it has to do, again, with what's in the contract and what is in some of the state laws that allow the arbitrator to play that role. Because arbitration is not appealable. Whatever the decision of the arbitrator, there's no appeal. So what these unions have done is that because they're the ones paying all this money, these arbitrators, and the cities, and they, some of these cities secretly don't want these cops to be disciplined. They have to put on a good show and oh yes, I'm going to discipline this guy, knowing that it's going to be undone. So there's a bit of that as well. But basically, they hire arbitrators that they know are going to do the job for them by making sure there's no discipline. They know who they are.
But how do these arbitrators manage to accomplish that? I mean, there's certain ones that are able to do it, and they know who they are. They hire them. But what are the techniques these arbitrators use to pull this off?
They do a lot of things, like they try to bring in all the good stuff this guy ever did in the past and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong. If, again, you're talking about things like the guy getting fired because he showed up to work late too many times or whatever, right? I don't really care about that kind of crap. I just don't. That's not what harms the community. I mean, it might be a ripoff or something, but it's not really what harms the community. It's in these situations where cops get involved in activities that really should be classified as criminal activities, because police brutality is a crime. Assaulting people, all this kind of stuff. These things are crimes. And because of the influence of the union on the ability to rig elections, basically, through their endorsements, judges who are the only union that can endorse a judge is the police union in Minnesota, and the
really
union, yeah. And so these judges are very married to the police union, and they will not allow prosecutions to happen. Prosecutors need cops. They're not going to prosecute cops. If they do, they're going to do what's happening in St. Paul around that Yanez prosecution in the Philando Castile case. They're going to lowball the charges, and so they charged him with second degree murder or manslaughter, which means not planned, and not even engaging in conduct that could lead to somebody's death, but kind of almost like accidental death, which is bull. If you look at what he did and the actual scene, it should have been actually second-degree murder, not manslaughter. But basically, they charged him with second-degree manslaughter and then 2 felony assault charges. They'll get him on one of those felony assault charges, but they're never going to get him on manslaughter because A, they're not going to try hard enough to, and B, the judge will make sure that doesn't happen. So the whole system's rigged in that way to not treat a crime as a crime if you carry a badge. If you wear a badge and you wear blue clothes and that's your costume or whatever, you ain't going to go down on those charges because they're going to make sure you don't. And then the arbitrator plays that role as well.
So basically the arbitrator knows who's who, knows who's on the take, kind of arranges for those people to be involved in the situation, basically sets the battlefield, if you will, for a win.
Well, there's 2 sides to it, because there's the one side is criminal, right? Criminal prosecutions, and that's in the court system with, like I said, the crooked judges and the bought-off prosecutors and all that. And then the other side is any kind of discipline that happens through like the HR personnel type process, which is like internal affairs and the arbitration system, the union, and so forth. And so they work both sides of this thing to make sure that a cop never has any consequences for their conduct. And people, if they really want to get in, one way to really get at this stuff is to look at these contracts and be at the table, figure out some way to be at the table or make demands around those contracts. And this is very hard to do because, for example, in Minnesota, our open meeting law makes virtually every meeting that politicians have an open meeting except for labor negotiations and a couple other smaller things. But anything that's labor negotiations and things like that are not open meetings. So it's very hard. You can't hardly get in the door on these contracts. But what we've done is we've figured out when they are renegotiating the police contract, and we've been making certain demands on what the city council and their representatives demand in that union contract. Because what happens is if you don't make those demands and then the contract gets signed or whatever, and like the contract here for our cops is somewhere in the neighborhood of almost 300 pages long. It's a real read to find it. And 9/10 of it is like what happens if the guy gets hurt on the job or this and that and overtime and stuff that we don't care anything about. So we winnowed it down to 44 pages that we cared about of the stuff that has to do with what happens if they get disciplined. And we started putting pressure on them to change those things. And you have to do that at the point when that negotiation is happening or even before. Because if you don't do that, they sign a contract, it's good for another 2, 3, 4 years, and then the whole time you're going to the city council to say, we need to make this change, then they go, oh, we can't because our union won't let us do it. The contract won't let us do that. That's bull. It's because they signed a contract because they didn't care, and they rubber stamped it, and that's messed up. So you have to get in on the front end and stop them from doing all that.
Okay. So would you say the unions are kind of the Goliath in this thing, like take them down and, or limit their ability to push so hard? That would be probably the biggest thing we could do right now.
I
kind of feel like it is, but what do you think?
One of the important things we can do right now, taking on those union contracts, actually reading them and knowing what they say. Because the other thing is this: they always told us, for example, that if cops kill somebody, like they did in the Jamar Clark case, they told us, oh, well, we have to give those cops 48 hours before we can question them. We read the union contract, and that was not true. That was not true at all. That was misconstruing something that said that the cop had to be able, like if they get questioned, a union representative has to be available to be with them when they're doing it. They were misconstruing that to say that this is like some kind of 48-hour rule. And that's not true. So first thing you got to do is read the freaking contract and see whether they're telling you the truth or not. They lie about that mess all the time because they don't think anybody's going to read it and find out what it is. So that's the first thing. Second thing, look at those disciplinary decision things. Look at that section, because we need to make it so that cops can be disciplined if they engage in misconduct. Like I said, if they engage in stuff like they're showing up to work late or whatever, I frankly don't care about that stuff that much. That's between them and their boss or whatever. They can work that out. But things where it involves like excessive force and things like that, every police department, and people don't know this, every police department as part of their policies has what's called a use of force grid. And they have a disciplinary grid that goes with it. So use of force grid talks about like, if this happens, here's what you can do. If this happens, here's what you can do. And it escalates starting from voice commands to open hand, closed fist, use of an implement that's non-deadly, use of a deadly implement or including deadly force like a gun. So it runs through that gamut. Now, there's no law that says that you have to start at the beginning and work your way up. You can start where you need to. If some guy is waving around a gun, you don't have to try to talk him down. It'd be good if you did, perhaps, but that's not how the thing works. But the bottom line is that you need to know about that, and you also have to know about the disciplinary grid, because they mess with that all the time. Like, one of the things about the disciplinary grid is if you typically, like, let's say that it's in Minneapolis, they have A, B, C, and D classes of violations. So if using a racial epithet is a Class B violation, doing it more often, within a certain time frame, enhances the discipline for that particular thing. So there's like a range of discipline they would give. Learning that disciplinary grid, learning about their use of force grid, learning about their policies and practices, that's how you can take that on and make a difference. And again, reading that contract, because they'll tell you something's in the contract, they won't be anywhere in there. All the time they do that. People have to, that's the unsexy work of the movement, but it's the absolutely necessary work if you want to have real impacts on the way they operate and really get rid of police brutality on the front end before it happens to people.
So, the unions, I think people definitely need to focus on those. So, there's two other things I can really think of that everybody's heard of grand juries. But I think a lot of people are under the impression that a grand jury works the same way when it's a matter of police misconduct as it does for civilian matter, which it doesn't. And also, I think most people just aren't really aware of the nuances of what a grand jury is, what makes it different from a regular jury, and why it's convened. And can you just kind of break that down for people, because these things are designed to fail, and I think people need to know how.
Well, depends on who's your definition of failure. So I'll come back to that in a second, though. So grand juries started in this country as a way to keep people from being prosecuted when there wasn't enough evidence against them. It was really a protection initially. So because it was designed as a protection, basically a prosecutor, if they wanted to bring serious charges against a person, the government would require that prosecutor to present their evidence kind of on almost like a preliminary trial type thing, where they would have to present it, and then the judge and or jury, typically a jury, and it's a large jury. In Minnesota, it's 23 members, for example. But basically a jury would hear the evidence and determine if there was enough to even bring charges. And this is really to keep people from having charges brought against them that were fairly baseless and devastating their lives. But it's turned out to be used a completely different way. What they use it for now basically is, and I should go back and say one thing about it. Because it was used in that way, it's not an adversarial process. See, all normal court trials are adversarial. There's a prosecutor, there's a defense attorney, basically in some fashion like that, and the two of them have opposite goals. And so that makes it adversarial, so that you've got two people fighting on two different sides of the same thing. And that's a fairly important dynamic, because it helps to keep them in check. So if the prosecutor starts asking inappropriate questions, for example, the defense attorney will object and so forth. So that adversarial process is important, because it means that there's at least one person besides the person who's coming under attack by the government who is standing with that person coming under attack. And that's a really important dynamic. You got to have a good attorney that's standing with you, looking out for your best interests. In the grand jury process, because it's essentially a trial or a kind of a rehearsal to see if the prosecutor has enough evidence to bring forward a case, it's not adversarial. In fact, the lawyer for the other side can't even be in, and the person from the other side can't be in the grand jury. They're considered essentially a witness to the grand jury process. So we've seen this be used against activists quite a bit. There's a whole group of folks, I believe it's up to 7 people now, who have been subject to the grand jury for their work in support of Palestine. And so they're, including a number of anti-war activists here in the Twin Cities, where they came, literally raided their houses, the FBI raided their houses, and then they've been subject to a grand jury proceeding. And that's not benign. That's not in any way. And they were commanded to come before the grand jury. All 7 have resisted doing so and have said that they would not do so, but they're subject to being imprisoned at any time for that. So, this is not an adversarial proceeding, and the job that the prosecutor does in those proceedings is only as good as he or she wants it to be. So, for example, in the police grand juries, what happens is they are supposed to be bringing a case against this officer, and they want to put it in front of a grand jury, and they can come in there and they can put forward the weakest case ever. It won't matter. They can really totally stack it. They can stack the grand jury with all white folks who are basically there to, from the countryside, who don't believe police do anything bad or whatever. And this is one of the ways that they stack these grand juries. And because the other side can't see what happens in that proceeding, the defense attorneys or any of that, or in this particular case, let's say, for example, a police brutality case, the family of the person who was harmed by that police officer or killed can't be in there. You don't know if they're doing a good job, bad job, or indifferent. What they're really doing is they're using that grand jury as political cover for not prosecuting that cop. They know they don't want to prosecute the cop. They go in there and they present this real weak case. They're not even trying to get an indictment of this person. And that's what comes out of it is an indictment. They're not even trying to get an indictment of this cop. And so they just go in there and put on a weak case. There was a case, for example, of a guy named Chris Burns. And this guy was, he was involved in a domestic, but he was the victim. And he was basically, and it wasn't even that much of a domestic. He and his significant other were fighting. The children were in the house with them. One of the children got scared and called the police. And within 6 minutes, he was dead. And he was actually the one getting beat up or getting, verbally abused and so forth. And within 6 minutes, they had choked him, yanked his neck back, broke his neck, and killed him. Okay, right in front of one of his children and his significant other. There was a grand jury proceeding, and we talked to a guy that was on the grand jury. There were 23 jurors. All of them were white except this guy. And this guy, because he was not white, they made him the foreman of the grand jury, so to speak, the head of the jury members. And they asked to hear the 911 tape when the child had called in. They wanted to hear the 911 tape because they wanted to know what the officers thought the situation was before they arrived. And they asked for it repeatedly. The judge said, no, you can't have it. The prosecutor said, no, you can't have it. And they basically were trying to make a decision on not all of the information. And this guy says, I'm not going along with that. I'm not going to do this. And the judge said, well, you're going to be held in contempt of court. He said, I am in contempt of this court because this is bogus. This is a bogus process. And basically they threw him out. They used a substitute, an alternate grand juror, and basically came back, no billing against the cops, no indictment. So these are the processes that are used in large measure by most prosecutors to avoid having to bring charges against cops. It's just a sham mechanism. I will say this, California recently ruled no more grand juries for police cases. Minnesota, our Hennepin County, which is the county that holds Minneapolis, our county prosecutor here said that he won't use them, but at the same time, he did such a rotten job in the case itself, it wouldn't have mattered if he used it or not because he didn't bring charges when he should have. So basically, that's the kind of mechanism that goes on, is that they do these grand jury processes. So now you know a little something about how they operate.
Okay. Now, when you spoke on unions and you spoke on how we can confront unions, do you have any ideas on how communities and organizations can go at this grand jury problem?
Well, for one thing, we should be flooding the prosecutor's office with messages saying no grand jury, demanding that there be no grand juries in these cases, because grand jury, again, is all behind closed doors. It's a secret process designed to let the cops off. So we should always be saying no grand jury. That's unacceptable. In Ramsey County, which is the county that holds St. Paul, they still use a grand jury process. And there was a case here, a man that was killed by the St. Paul police last May. And the family, and it was under very mysterious circumstances, and it was just a really ugly case. And the family found out that the grand jury was going to be held on starting December 21st. So there's two giveaways here. One is, of course, it's going to be harmful to the family for this to be at that time period. This was their very first Christmas without their loved one and so forth. But the second thing is, whenever there's any kind of a legal proceeding that happens right before a holiday, it's because they want it to go real fast. And in grand juries, if it goes real fast, it means they're not going to be looking at very much evidence. And if they're not looking at evidence, then it's a process that's a sham process, right? So we mounted a campaign basically to get people to call the prosecutor and say, no grand jury, But if you're going to do a grand jury, do it after the first of the year. You will not be doing that before the first of the year. Let these people alone, And so we had letters, we had people calling, all kinds of things like that, and they backed off and dropped it before the end of the year. So that was a pretty significant thing. We still say no grand jury, but we don't think we're going to be able to get that quite pulled off in this case. But we did get that pulled off in the Philando Castile case and in the Jamar Clark case. The big question, though, is what did they do after no grand jury? And in the case of Jamar Clark, they just flubbed the investigation to make sure that there were no charges. So, you got to stay on top of these guys every inch of the way.
Right. You really can't let up because they the moment they see a way to gain some ground, they take it, and that's this is a little off topic, but I feel this is how we have become a police and surveillance state. Is the moment we don't pay attention, the government just kind of moves in and gains a little ground, and then they're like, now here we are. Oh, look over there. And then,
and frankly, I put some of that on the national movement a bit. Back when Obama announced this task force on 21st century policing, I put together, because I told you I'm pretty connected to the national movement and know people all over the country that do this work. But when I refer to a national movement, we don't really have a national movement in police accountability. We have a lot of groups doing very good work in a lot of places, but we aren't connected in the deep way that we need to be. And that's one of my goals for the movement, is for us to become more connected to each other and to do work that's complementary so that we support each other. Because one of the things I said right before this is I put out a piece that talked about why we needed to come up with our own agenda, because the failure for us to define what we want as a movement makes room for things like this stupid 21st century task force to basically put out as the agenda for the movement the lowest possible common denominator, the lowest, stupid things like body cameras and crap that aren't going to do anything to help anybody. And it's really things that are meant to placate the movement and make people think that something's happening while actually maintaining the status quo. And that is like the oldest trick in the book, the oldest game. They've always done it. And if we don't define for ourselves what our agendas need to look like, then we just have all of that kind of stupidness going on. So I still think that there's a real important place in the movement to really be a movement, a national movement, and to support each other and to work in unison on some kinds of goals. And it doesn't have to be a lot of goals. It could be 3-4 things that we demand as a movement, like getting rid of grand juries everywhere, ensuring the police everywhere, things like that. Independent investigations and independent prosecutions of police, things like that need to happen on a national basis as well as locally, that we could be pushing for, that would be so much better than stupid body cameras and stupid crap that the DOJ is pushing that won't do anything except maintain the status quo.
I'm really glad to hear you talk about that initiative, the committee, whatever thing that Obama put together. I didn't even follow it that much because I knew all it was this issue had suddenly become big, and it was just the government's way of trying to take control of the situation and the narrative, and that's all it is. It's just their way of trying to water down any efforts for reform.
That's exactly right. It's also their way of trying to, control, like you said, control the narrative, control the perimeters of what it is that people are going to be allowed to talk about and what it is that we're going to be allowed to demand. And so by, doing this, and part of it was really funny because people were really buying into it. They're like, oh, we're going to go town to town and talk to people. They went to 2 towns, one of them being D.C., which is where their butts sit right now, and the other one was someplace in Indiana or something. And the people that they had on this task force, they're like, oh, we're going to have members of the community and blah, blah, blah. Not a single person on that task force has any history in the police accountability movement. But this is the kind of shams they do. And by the way, they don't just do this on that national basis. The DOJ has put together this little road show where they're showing up in all these communities, like they showed up in Minneapolis, National Institute for Trust and Justice, that's their new deal, and they have these, and it's under a program called COPS, COPS, that stands for Community-Oriented Policing Solutions or something like that. These things are basically, again, ways to placate people. They come into town, they put together some kind of local committee, and that local committee is always populated with people that are like in Minneapolis, people that are heads of organizations that get funding from the city. Not anybody the community picked, people with no history in this movement, who know nothing about the problems of it, know nothing about the policies and the issues and the things that people are trying to get to happen. And they have no history, no attachment to the movement, not even an interest in knowing what we think about, right? And they're in there doing all this planning and crap, and it's bogus. And nothing good can come out of those things. But boy, people will feel like something's happening because people are having meetings and blah, 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 and all this stuff. But these things are all designed to placate people and to maintain the status quo. And people have to be aware of that stuff. And again, that's under Obama now, okay?
Mm-hmm. It's basically propaganda strategy. Like when people think of propaganda, and I'm a trained ad man myself, so I have this is an area I have a lot of understanding of. But when people think of propaganda, they think of posters and slogans and stuff, and that's part of it. What people don't realize is there's a whole lot of other stuff. Propaganda, good propaganda campaign goes way beyond that into seizing the narrative and propping up false groups. And, I encourage everybody to look into Edward Bernays. He's the father of modern PR and how he did the things he did, how he got fluoride in our water normalized and this kind of thing. But I kind of digress there. But you touch.
Yeah, what you're talking about is right. Because there's a lot of groups even that have tried to come in and sort of kind of co-opt the police accountability movement, like MoveOn.org co-opted the anti-war movement, and became like sort of this front group of the Democratic Party. Much like that, there have been groups that are trying to pull some of that crap in the police accountability movement, and I've definitely seen it. It's been you asked me a while ago what's gone on in the last few years. I think there's a lot of very good things that have gone on. Like I said, I was thanking Ferguson every day, and tons of young people are coming into this movement, which is fabulous. There was a little bit of an issue with some of these younger folks having a bit of arrogance, not wanting to learn from the people that already know what they're doing in this movement. And I don't want to beat on young people, though, because I love the energy. The energy is fabulous. I just want them to take a little tiny step back and be willing to learn, because, we had in the Twin Cities here after Philando Castile, we have had a huge just bubbling up of all these groups in the Twin Cities, new groups of young activists. But at the same time, they weren't understanding about COINTELPRO and things like that. And some of us had to spend some time sort of educating people, because they weren't understanding why things kept happening to them. They would do their planning, and it's because they were talking to cops and telling them what they're planning to do. And things like that, you don't need to negotiate with the city to do a protest. Just do your protest. We had to give them education about some of that stuff, because they didn't know, the roles that these characters play and things like that. So there's been kind of a little of that, but really, it's been really good these last few years. But just like anything else, we are now starting to see these groups that are really fronts for Democratic Party or the federal government or whatever, that are acting like they're part of this movement, but they're really not. They're co-opting the movement. So we have to all, be clear on our goals and be careful and do work that keeps us safe so that we can avoid problems. And then, like I said, we, have to be clear on our goals. And when we're not clear on our goals, that's when we start to fall apart and not be as successful.
Right. Now I want to move on to another thing that is kind of arcane knowledge, and a lot of people don't even know about these entities, but they play a huge role in this, because they certify officers to be able to be police officers, and that's post boards. And can you go into what a post board is and how they work and what they're supposed to do and what they actually do?
Right. Every profession, or a lot of professions in states choose to license a lot of professions. Like, for example, registered nurses. There's always, every single state's going to have a medical board. So for doctors, they're going to have a nursing board for nurses. And then in Minnesota, it's called the Post Board, Peace Officer Standard and Training Board. It is likely to be called that not that same name, but it'll have the same function in other towns, or I mean in other states. They're not all called the same name, but basically it's a licensing board for what they call peace officers or police officers. And what those agencies do, just like any licensing board, they're supposed to set standards for education. They're supposed to set standards for who can be licensed in a particular area as a particular profession. And they're supposed to also set standards of conduct for those licensees. For the people that they license, they're supposed to have standards of conduct so that if you engage in certain kind of conduct, you can't have a license. So, or you'll lose your license, or your license will be suspended, and things like that. And our post board, it's all this is under state statute, and it says what the peace officer standards for conduct are, and what the things that are supposed to happen if the cop violates those standards in some fashion, breaks the law or does this and that or violates the standards. And they're supposed to be able to do things to their licenses, take action on their licenses. And our post board here is a total loser. I mean, they do not. We took 31 cases to them of where a particular police officer, he was just terrorizing the community. He was part of a gang task force, and he took full advantage of his role by doing things like stealing. You would see like a Latino person standing at a bus stop, and he would just go up and steal his phone. He stole electronics. He was stealing things, but not only was he stealing things, he was beating people constantly. This guy, we managed to gather from the community 31 complaints of people who had been brutalized by this guy and otherwise treated badly by this guy. And we had videotape footage and all kinds of evidence. I mean, we didn't walk in there with like 31 pieces of paper of complaints. We walked into the post board with banker's boxes full of evidence against this guy. Banker's boxes full of it. We had videotapes of him beating people and doing all this other stuff. And that post board, this agency that's supposed to take action on these cops' licenses, did nothing. They didn't address it in any way. Actually, they threw it out, and we found out later that they never even looked at the video footage. Also, they were supposed to notify us of the hearing so that we could attend, since we were representing these 31 people. And basically, they didn't do that. They didn't even follow their own laws. And we have never been able to get them to do anything, to follow their laws. And we went to their legislature. We went to the Public Safety Commission, we went to the governor's office, we went to the attorney general's office, and we said, here's what we did, here's what we gave them, here's what they did with it or didn't do with it, and here's how they violated the law, and nothing has happened. So if you ever need any proof that cops are above the law, even their own agency that's supposed to license them is above the law. And just if I can throw one more little thing in there about this, but it's still important to hold these agencies accountable. You have to go to their meetings, find out. Ours meets once a quarter. We go in there, and when we show up, their meeting, whatever their agenda is going to get pushed to the side because we're going to do what we need to do. They have a little public community thing where you can speak in the first 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. And we're like, oh, no. I've got all these families of people that have been killed by your licensees sitting here waiting to speak. We will not be done in 10 minutes. You will sit here until we are done. And we will do things like that. We'll go in there and play videos and make them look. We're not going to let them act like they don't know this stuff or that it's going on. So it's really important to hold these. And we've done a lot of protests at the post board. It's very important to let them know that you know what's up and hold their feet to the fire. It's very important to do that. So that's another kind of angle people can take.
So that's the best way to deal with post boards, really, is just play hardball. Really come at them hard.
Yeah, we wanted to sue them. We actually had to put together a lawsuit against them, but unfortunately our state law really makes it so you cannot sue them. It would be pretty much impossible to sue them, and it would have been very expensive, and it would have got thrown out anyway. So we didn't go that. We ended up not going that route, but we've just basically made their lives a living hell ever since. It's like, you think that you're going to sit in this little room and you're going to get away with this crap. You are not. Every legislative hearing about getting their funding, we're right there testifying against them. We're right there exposing them. So, and one of the interesting things that's just come out, and this is something, again, for people to think about that they could do in their own areas. we found out the post board, one of the things that says for sure is if a cop is convicted of a gross misdemeanor or felony, that they have to have action on their license. And if it's a felony, their license has to be taken from them. They have to have their license taken. We have found out basically through this one reporter here, she's been doing the research to find out that all these cops have been prosecuted for, for things like domestic assault or things like that. One guy was like robbing banks on his way to work, and then he was putting the money in his like Minneapolis police locker and all this stuff. These cops have been getting convicted of different crimes, and they have not done any actions on almost all of these cops that got convicted of gross misdemeanors or felonies. They've done nothing with their licenses. And again, that's a violation of the law. So this is all getting exposed, and it's going to be real interesting. We've been actually helping that reporter, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that whole thing, because this is ridiculous. It's not acceptable that they just throw out complaints against cops and don't take action on their licenses. So we have to be, we have to hound them, because that's another way to go at that license.
And I think you just touched on a what I kind of feel is like the silver bullet for all of this: accountability. Because you have these tragic things happening way too often by police officers. And the problem, it is a problem, but the real problem isn't that cops are brutal, cops are killing unarmed people. It's that they're doing it and they get away with it. They even keep their job so they can do it again. That's the real heart and soul of the problem. And if we can just get accountability and get those people out of there, I think the whole landscape would change a lot. What do you think?
I completely agree. That is exactly it. When they, like I was telling you about the DOJ and all of this stuff that they're up to, and then they're coming in these communities and doing this National Institute of Trust and Justice and looking at police implicit bias and all of this other kumbaya, what I call kumbaya crap. And I hope it's okay to say that on a radio, or on a show, on post. But basically, when they do all of this stuff, right? It's a way to skirt around the problem. The problem is not that cops don't like the community or there's not enough trust. We don't worry about trust. If the police behaved correctly, we wouldn't have to worry about trust. Trust would follow, okay? Because people are afraid, and they do, and I live in North Minneapolis. I live in an area that's fairly, got a lot of stuff going on in it. And there are sometimes gunshots and things like that happen. And people do not want to be afraid of crime. They want to be able to send their kids outside to play on the swings without worrying about their kids getting blown away and all that stuff. So people don't want to worry about crime. So they feel like they need the cops. And we can have a conversation about whether the cops are, in fact, needed. That's a different whole conversation. But a lot of people feel like they want to be able to rely on the cops to deal with crime, but then they feel like they're squeezed between thugs and blue. And as long as there's no accountability, that will remain the case. So the issue is we have to have accountability. Having little kumbaya sessions about let's trust the police and woody-woo and, implicit bias and all this stuff ain't going to do jack. Okay, we have to hold police accountable for their conduct. When we do that, then those cops that engage in that conduct go away. And then what follows is what follows, which is maybe that those officers who don't choose to engage in that conduct will be available to people to provide those services if that's what people feel are necessary. But also, it changes the culture. Accountability changes cultures. And the whole thing in our system is that we have a bad culture, and cultures are by definition a top-down phenomenon. So we have police chiefs and other police leadership that think it's fine for people to get the crap beat out of them all over the place. They think it's fine. They think that cops that do that kind of stuff are really the go-getters, the kind of hot dogs that they like. They keep the so-called riffraff of the community in check, which, by the way, is not referring to criminals. It's referring to you and me,
Right.
And black folks in the community and other targeted populations and so forth. So, they're fine with that conduct. And that's the reason why they don't rein it in, because I'm telling you, in situations where you have police chiefs who say that this conduct is unacceptable and they apply accountability for unacceptable conduct, that conduct goes away. It's the nature of the beast. And there are a few police chiefs who are doing a good job in this country. I'd like to throw that out there. And it's because they set a standard, they hold their people accountable to that standard, and it's just like any other kind of situation. When people are held accountable, they know what conduct is not going to be accepted, and they don't engage in that conduct.
Right. And I don't want to gloss over the problem when I say this, but there are people who got into law enforcement because they wanted to help people and keep people safe. And it kind of looks to me when I take a look at that culture that those people, their hands are kind of tied. They're in a position where they can't really do much about it except just try to do their job their way. And it's sad because I think it's really questionable as to whether we actually need the police, but society wants police, and that's America wants police, and that's just the way it's going to be, and that's the way it is. I think with the state of policing today, we're not getting what we bargained for. I don't think America's getting what it's bargained for.
Well, the thing is, we have to set reasonable expectations. Cops don't prevent crimes. They address crime after the fact. They don't prevent crimes, and that's the reality. So we do have to have reasonable expectations. Also, we expect cops to address all manner of social ills that they are poorly prepared to do and don't have the resources or ability to do a proper job of. Like, cops are the last people on the planet we ought to be calling for a mental health crisis. They don't know how to deal with it. They usually end up, let me put it like this, more than 50% of people who've been killed by police in the studies of the last 10 years were in the middle of a mental health crisis. Police are ill prepared to deal with those kinds of folks. That is not their forte. That's not their skill set. And so it makes sense that we have other mechanisms for that. Like, if I'm having a heart attack, I don't call the police, I call an ambulance, right? If I'm having a medical ailment, when we have mental health ailments, we got to have mental health ambulances and things like that. So we have to come up with other ways to address social service situations or social, kind of social ills, things like homelessness and stuff like that. So that's one of the problems, is we rely on cops to handle things that cops shouldn't be handling because it's not an appropriate thing. But the other, again, is a real tug of war in this country about what role police should have in this society and what role they do have. And I think for a lot of the powers that be, the role for them is for them to keep certain populations down such that the powers that be can maintain their power. So, that's my personal belief. I should mention that that's not necessarily the position of CUAPB. CUAPB is a large organization with people that have a lot of different beliefs about the police. That's just my own personal belief, and so I don't want to represent that as the group's belief. The other thing I would say is this. One of the things that people talk about a lot is they're like, well, if he was a good cop, he wouldn't have let that bad cop do that thing to that person. And that there might be some truth to that. But what we do in policing today, and you can see evidence of this all over the place, is that we don't hold the bad officer. And again, I don't like that terminology, but I got to use it for right now. We don't hold that bad officer accountable. What we do is we make bad consequences for the one who tries to. So for example, if one cop stops another cop from beating somebody up, that cop that stopped that cop from beating the person up is going to come under all kinds of attack.
Yes, and that has happened.
Yes, it has, a lot. One of the things our organization does that's a bit unique is we stand up with whistleblower cops. We have a long history of this because we say that if the cop does the right thing, we better be prepared to stand with that person, or no other cops are going to want to do that. So in this particular case with the, we were talking about the complaints to the post board about these people that were affected by the the Metro Gang Strike Force. We also complained because one of the incidents happened in this one town, and that town refused to investigate it because it was being done by a cop of a neighboring precinct, a neighboring suburb. And so we went to that town and said, hey, how come you're not investigating this case? We gave you the complaints, we gave you the material, how come you're not investigating? Two of the officers in that town said, well, why aren't we investigating? So what if it's a cop from another jurisdiction or whatever. Why aren't we investigating? Those two cops got in big trouble. Both of them lost their jobs and everything, and we did a lot. We ended up getting the one guy his job back and also a bunch of back pay and all that stuff. The other guy, we're still working on his case. But this does happen, that whistleblower cops get in trouble. It's also not a realistic expectation to have one employee control another employee's behavior. I mean, this is a job for these cops, right? So if I'm a manager of a place, I don't expect my employees to control each other's behavior. I expect if an employee's having a problem that they'll come and bring the problem to me, but I don't expect one employee to step in and stop the other employee from doing something bad. Oh, this guy's embezzling, so I'm going to go tell him not to embezzle or whatever can happen in a workplace, right, or whatever. I expect that employee to bring that to me. That I shouldn't go, well, why didn't you stop him from, embezzling or whatever? That's a ridiculous expectation, That's just not a fair expectation. So I think when people have that as a demand or an expectation, I think that's a little bit wrong-headed, because we haven't created the culture where that's acceptable. And listen, I don't know about you, but I depend on going to work every day for my livelihood. You know what I mean? It's like people have to support their families, and to put that expectation on working people, I don't think it's a fair expectation. So that's, I always hear about that, people saying that, but I think it's a wrong way. We need instead systems and leadership of police to hold them accountable.
Right. That's absolutely what it is, because I mean, I hear that all the time too. And I think to myself, when I hear people say this, if you were in that situation, you would probably keep your mouth shut too, because the retaliation can be quite severe. I mean, Tim has had a guest on his show, My Non-Objective Opinion, named Alex Salazar, who touched on that really good. And I'm going to work on getting Alex on here to talk about that. This Blue Lives Matter tribalism that's going on. I mean, it's really severe. You can put yourself in danger. You can put your family in danger. And that's one of the things that's going to have to be confronted and challenged, is the fact that that culture enforces bad behavior pretty much. So
I mean, it's so bad that when one cop targets, there's been a number of these incidents where it's like there's a black cop, he's off duty, he's walking around or whatever, and other cops jump the guy and beat him up because they don't realize he's a cop. They will circle the wagons around the cops that beat that cop up. That is how bad it is. They just will not, go there. So expecting a lone employee to take up what police management refuses to take up is an unrealistic expectation, and it's a very unfair expectation.
Right. Now, Tim, you had something that you wanted to discuss here, correct?
Yeah, it was pretty much just another question. I was wondering if you had support public support mainly from any active police, not police who aren't fired.
Oh, yeah, we definitely do have support from active police officers. Some of them can't be super public, but we have a lot of support from a lot of police officers around the country, amazingly. We've actually been, there was an officer, now this particular guy was a whistleblower, and he ended up losing his job. His name's Sam Clark, and he was out of the Newark, New Jersey Police Department. And he basically has written 2 books about what happens to whistleblower cops. And he runs an organization for whistleblower cops. And he's a wonderful guy. Love this guy. He's written these 2 books, and he has featured our organization prominently in both of them. He feels like what we do is the right way to take this stuff up. And we do have a lot of officers that think what we're doing is very good. Some of them can't be super public, but, some of them are fairly public about their support of us, because there are people that are in that system that don't like that system. And they should not like that system because, again, it's a bad system because it validates bad behavior and makes room for that behavior, refuses to check that behavior, which creates a really bad working environment for officers who don't want to be in that, who don't want to engage in that conduct and don't want to be part of that. It really creates a bad environment. There's a real mentality. I was talking to a woman today who is a former whistleblower cop when we were meeting, and she was saying, she's been told by people that, you don't know how to support the Blue Brotherhood or the blue wall or whatever, and she's like, I do support it. I support good policing is how she framed it up. And it's very frustrating for the ones who don't want, like Steve said, there's people that come into this for good reasons and valid reasons, and they don't want to be part of something bad. And it's very hard for them because the system is not set up to validate those people or support them in any way whatsoever.
Yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to kind of ask for any other issues or any other things that I didn't ask about that are really big obstacles that need to be confronted that people might not be aware of. But before I do, is there anything else you wanted to add or ask, Tim? Because now is a really good time.
Yeah. Now I know in groups I've worked with, we've had some cops slide us information real kind of secretly. But then I'm wondering if some of the cops who support you might be just there to watch you.
Well, first of all, we don't let police officers in our meetings ever. With extremely narrow exceptions, if we need to meet, like with the two officers that we were working with, the two whistleblowers out of Crystal, when we were meeting with them, we had separate meetings. We don't allow police officers in our meetings, and or public officials of any kind whatsoever. Members of the judicial system, members of the public officials of any kind, none of those people are allowed in our meetings. Our meetings are a safe space. They're a haven for people who've been brutalized by the police. Most all of our leadership is people who are survivors of police brutality or family members of people who've been killed. So we use, just so people know our language, we use survivor to refer to people who were not killed by police but who were brutalized. People like Steve, people like me. And then we use victims to refer to people who died at the hands of police. So basically, our meetings are havens for survivors and victims, and family members of victims. And so we don't allow those folks in our meetings, and so watching us is not really an issue. We our meetings are open, but we're cautious. We have the way our organization is structured is that everything we discuss in our public meetings, that people can come to. And here's the interesting part. We meet every single Saturday, and it doesn't matter what time of the year. The only time we wouldn't meet on Saturday is if it's actually on a holiday like New Year's or something like that, right? But we meet every single Saturday, and we have been for 16 years. And as one of the founders of the group, I don't even know how many meetings that means I've been to. You know what I mean? That's just that many. So we meet a lot. But our public meetings, we only take up people's cases, and we take up what work we're working on right now, different projects and things like that. But if there's things that we need to talk about offline, the way we do that is we have separate meetings, board meetings, and things like that. So it would be pretty hard for people to watch our work because we're very public about the work that we do. If you're going to go to a city council meeting and talk out at the city council meeting, you're probably going to be pretty public about that because you want lots of people to be there with you. So we don't make a lot of bones about what we do. We put it right out there pretty much, So we don't worry too much about getting watched by the cops. I'm relatively certain that they do watch us, and have interest in our activities, but pretty much everything. In fact, we actually do know they do because I went down to Bloomington, which is another inner ring suburb of Minneapolis. It's a wealthy suburb. And we wanted to know, that's where the Mall of America is. And we knew, there's been protests at the Mall of America around police conduct. And we wanted to know if they were watching us. And in fact, they had been going into our social media accounts and pulling all of our stuff and everything. But hey, you know what? We have a real large Facebook presence and whatever, we're just going to keep doing our work and we can't let them stop us. But basically, so yeah, we don't allow cops in our meetings, and that keeps some of that kind of problem out of under control. Let's just say it like that. So
that's good.
Yeah. But of course, every activist group has to use good movement security to keep yourself safe, and if you plan events that might be marginally not legal or whatever, then you should plan them in small groups and not in a big meeting. The normal stuff.
Yeah, I was asking because, like you said before, you were a public group, and I was just curious if they were there to try to take information back and thwart your efforts before you could really get moving on certain issues. But
well,
yeah, that's good.
Probably happened maybe once in a while, but we don't really see. I mean, we're kind of a group that people, once they get involved with us, people keep coming to the group, and so we kind of know people, and we get to kind of suss some of that out. We don't see a lot of people that are one-timers that show up. People get engaged with the group, and then the other thing is we put them to work, so it'd be kind of hard for them to just show up and take some notes and leave. Like we're spending time with them and making them do work. So, then we're going to find out who they are at that point, and they're going to do the work, and that's going to be cool. So.
Awesome.
And you guys do work very hard. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I remember when I was working with you guys, there were plenty of late night sessions. I became a coffee addict. That's when I really developed my caffeine addiction.
One of the things we do a lot of, and it's, again, not the sexiest work, but we do a lot of lawsuits. We sue a lot of people. And we, like I say, litigious as hell. I'm proud of it. I don't have any problem with us suing when, like, Minneapolis tries to keep the police complaints away from us, or they try to do something wrong or whatever. And we sue people, and we help other people sue people. And so we do a lot of that, and a lot of that involves one of the ways we've been able to do it with no money, because we're a group that has no money. I mean, and we're all volunteers and have no money. One of the ways we've been able to do that is because, we're very blessed to have some lawyers that are willing to do low pay or no pay work for us. We're very lucky. And the other thing is that the reason they're willing to do that is because we do 99% of the work ourselves. We will never ask a lawyer to do the lawsuit without us doing all the research first, getting everything together. We're in the middle of a lawsuit against a suburb right now, and we have done 99% of the work for that lawsuit. I mean, they've got to do the lawyer pieces of it, which is writing up their stuff, but I'm going to give them everything that they need to write that stuff up and even do a good bit of the writing. When we wrote our lawsuit, what they call the complaint, the actual lawsuit, we mostly did that writing ourselves. And then he just cleaned up the legal language and stuff. So that's how we do that stuff. And these, again, are all skills people can learn. It sounds scary, but it's not. It's actually pretty easy. So these are all things we can all do, and people should be taking up this stuff. I really hope more people will. It's one thing. It's good to have protests in the streets. It is good, but we need to pair it with activities outside of the streets that seek to advance the things that we've raised awareness of and raised pressure on in the streets.
I dig it. I totally dig it.
I do have one more I want to throw in, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
That you haven't asked me about. I want to talk about a phenomenon that people may or may not be aware of, a thing that we call stolen lives. Stolen lives are the people who have been killed by police in this country, and we have an epidemic. I mean, I'm going to guess your listeners would know this by now, but there is a real epidemic of stolen lives, people who have been killed by police in this country, and it is getting worse and worse by the year. I mean, it is really serious business. The Guardian, people can go on the Guardian's website. If you just go to the Guardian and look for a thing called The Counted, they are, in my estimate, the best list of people who have been killed, and even they are not totally complete. So we actually keep a list here in Minnesota of every person who's lost their lives at the hands of law enforcement. The reason why The Counted is not as complete is because we include things like deaths during high-speed chases, including people who were not the people who were being chased, for example, and stuff like that. And we try our best to capture pictures of these people, things like that. And we maintain, you'll see on our website, if you look on Stolen Lives, you'll see that we have a book that we produce every year of all of the stolen lives in the state. And we have documented in our years of existence, 16 years, we are at over 300. I think it's 326 stolen lives in the state of Minnesota alone. And again, many of the lists only show people that have been killed by gunshots by the police, but we include other things like police mowing people down, taser deaths, all kinds of other things like that. These, again, are really important statistics to keep. There's no database anywhere that outlines the magnitude of the problem of bad policing. including not just stolen lives, but like all these people that have been hurt by police, people who have been falsely imprisoned by police, all that. There's no database that contains that information. We've come the closest to it of any group that I know. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons I'm raising this is because we also took our concerns about policing in the United States to we've reported multiple times to the United Nations. And I realize that that's not the strongest way to take this on because they have limited powers and so forth, but it is a human rights violation. It's a violation of international law to allow police brutality to occur and to not do anything about it and not address it. And we were working with other organizations that wanted to document this to the United Nations. So we worked together, and our statistics became very important because I'm telling you, we're like the only group that's really documenting this in any real way. And it's super important to do that and not rely on like these government agencies like civilian reviews and all this blah, blah, because they don't do a good job and they don't document well. And you've got to do your own work on that stuff. So, and especially around these stolen lives, and telling these people's stories puts a human face to this tragedy. And that is vital. So I would really invite your listeners to please go and look on our website, click on Stolen Lives, and you will see how we do this work. And we include every single person in that book, whether it might appear that the killing was justified, and that kind of thing, or not, because we can't know. So many times the media only reports what the cops' version of things are, not that person. Their person can't speak for themselves. They're dead. So we don't give the cops the benefit of the doubt. That's how we frame it. We say we put it all up there, and we're not giving the cops the benefit of the doubt. We're just going to tell the stories. So I think that that's another way people can really step into this work and do good work on it.
Yeah. You like it, Tim?
I love it.
Yeah. Well, do you can you think of anything else you want to ask Michelle? Tim, there's been a lot of information here, that's for sure, but
yeah, I learned a lot today, things I didn't really realize or things I didn't even know. I can't think of anything right now. I appreciate you coming on here as a guest.
It's great. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And one of the things, like I said, these are we got grief in the movement in the beginning of our organization about doing case-based work. But a lot of the case-based work we do is with families of people who've been killed by police. It brings people into the movement. It also, you become an important resource for those families. I do a lot of meeting with families. That's one of my personal main activities in the group. It has to do with because I have a nursing background, and so I'm able to help people line up things like independent autopsies, help them deal with the media, help them figure things out at a time when they are devastated. A lot of the people that get killed by police are young people, and these are people that had a whole life in front of them, and their parents are no parent expects to outlive their child, and so it's really devastating for people, and especially it happens usually to healthy young people who, and it's very sudden. The way they find out about it is really awful, and then they are thrown into this thing where the police are just vilifying their family member, like smearing them in the media to try to justify what they did by killing this person or whatever. And this family is just totally thrown for a loop. They don't know what to do. They don't understand how this is going to feel for them and how they're going to do this stuff. So being that resource to those families is huge. And again, it brings those people into the movement in a way that's very important. And that it helps them, and it helps survivors by being pulled into the movement. It helps those of us who have survived police brutality to regain our dignity, regain our personal sense of power, and to do work collectively that's important and that tries to help to make sure that this doesn't happen to the next person. This I cannot emphasize enough. It is so important that we do our work collectively, and we do it in ways that empower survivors and victims, or I should say families and victims, and to seek justice for them while being part of a bigger kind of agenda of holding police accountable and making changes that will make things safer for everybody in the community.
I think the case-based work is, in some ways, it's the most important work you do, because I really, having gone through the process of trying to get justice after experiencing really, really twisted police brutality, I feel like the process is designed, like it was planned this way to leave you demoralized and feeling powerless because they don't want you to get up and confront this issue. Doing the case-based work goes to these people and lets them get up and dust themselves off and attack this thing, because and that's important, because that's where you're going to find the true passion. That's where you're going to find the people who are willing to see it through.
Yeah, this is a very hard system that is here to reinforce a very entrenched problem, and the only way we get at this work and really have success, the only way is to work collectively and to put survivors and family members of victims at the forefront of this movement as leadership, and to really strengthen those folks and empower them to be the changes that we need. And to develop those changes and to really own that role. And so to me, the most important people in terms of who should be leadership in this movement is people who are survivors of police brutality and family members of victims. And when we use them as props, which is one of the things that sometimes happens in the movement that I disagree with, is sometimes these people are just thought of as props, or we bring them on just to talk, but we don't engage them and keep them involved in the movement and keep them at the forefront of leadership of this movement. When we do that, that's wrong. Then that's an ego thing. That's not a thing that actually grows this movement and benefits the movement. So, again, I think the work has to be done collectively, has to be done with those groups of people in the forefront and with their interests. And those folks, survivors and family members of victims, are the people that inform our policies and our work, and that always has to be the way it is. And then we take it on both in the streets and in the background, where some of this stuff needs to be confronted directly. That's, to me, the secret to success.
And if there's just one takeaway that I want people to leave listening to this episode with, and this is why it was so important for me to bring you here, because I know what you've accomplished, and I knew you would be able to explain how really big this issue is, and how there's these entities and forces at play that need to be confronted, but also that they can be confronted, that you folks have had success confronting these issues, that it can be done. Yes, it's a lot of work. Yes, it's heartbreaking, but this can be done if we just get up and do it.
Yes.
And, you really laid that across here well today, and I love you for it. Tim, I told you there was going to be a lot of information in here, didn't I?
Yes, you did. You weren't lying.
Yeah, so I think we're at the end of our podcast, but Michelle, we need to have you back sometime just to dedicate an episode to these St. Paul principles, because I think that is so important. It's really just a few principles, but it's such a deep thing that it warrants its own hour to 2 hour discussion. And
I love to be back again.
Yes, hopefully you can come back for that sometime. And I'm even thinking one about constituent-based organizing as well. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming and doing this. And we'll have this out on the 9th. It'll be out and it'll be live. And I'm excited. This is such a great way to start it off. So...
Well, thank you again so much for having me. I've been delighted. Thank you. It's good to have the chance to talk with you and be on your show. Thank you.
Fantastic. I miss Minneapolis. I miss the activists there. Say hi to the good people of Minneapolis for me. Tell everybody, keep it up. Y'all are doing great work. So, all right. And that's the end of our episode. That was Michelle Gross. Michelle Gross is the president of Communities United Against Police Brutality. Their website is CUAPB.org. They're also on Facebook as Communities United Against Police Brutality. You can search them out. And they're on Twitter as CUAPB MPLS. So definitely follow those accounts, follow their website. If you want to know more about things you can do in your community, how you can organize, definitely get a hold of these people. They've walked the road and they've mapped it out, and they want to share what they've learned, and they want to help it get going elsewhere. Michelle, thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me. I'd be delighted to do it anytime you want.
And everybody listening, thank you for listening. This is the first IFoughtTheLaw.info podcast, signing off.